Welcome to the narrated step-by-step tutorial for my painting, Crooked River. The photograph on the right was my inspiration for this painting. It's a photo of the Cuyahoga River, also known as the Crooked River. I begin by doing a simple sketch of the major shapes in the composition using a B pencil. Next, I'll begin my sky wash using a combination of cerulean blue and quinacridone coral. I'll alternate back and forth on using these two colors. So it's a light middle value that I'm putting down in the sky right now. And that's the cerulean blue, so now I'm going to come in with just a touch of the quinacridone coral. And that gives just the suggestion of that bit of red that's in the sky. I didn't wet my paper ahead of time. I'm working wet on dry. However, as I progress through the painting of the sky area, the paper gets very saturated and I'll be adding paint into that wet area. So I've transitioned from working wet on dry to working wet into wet. At times, as I bring my brush in, I've loaded with water to help with the transition of one color and the next and to soften edges. While I started in the sky and called it a sky wash, I'm going to continue this wash further into my composition and start to define the distant mountain range using a mixture of ultramarine blue and quinacridone coral. So because I'm just continuing this wash, I'm going to get a soft edge. I didn't dry that sky area first, so it's very wet on the edge, and I can just continue it down, and this other color starts to define the mountain shapes there, yet leaving a soft transition from the sky to the edge of the mountain. If I had dried the sky wash and came in, it would have been a much harder edge, unless I had softened it with water or a fine mist spray. I'm going to continue this wash here on the other side of this tree. And now I'm going to dry the entire wash that I've done so far with my hairdryer. The paper is completely dry, and now I'm going to take the violet tone that I was using and give an indication of where I want some of that sky tone to show through the foliage of the tree. I'm going to carry some of that tone down in other areas of the tree line. And the one thing to keep in mind, while this tree line is made up of many trees, when I paint this, I'll handle it as if it's a few major shapes and not try to paint the individual trees. The reason for that, when you're looking at a line of trees in the distance, you don't necessarily see all the individual trees. There are some that stand out, but really what you start to see is the mass of the trees and the shape that's created by that assemblage or grouping of trees. I'm going to begin to paint this tree line, and as I had mentioned, I'm going to treat these as major shapes, and I've started this wash on this left hand side, but this is going to end up being one continuous wash from the left side of the paper all the way over to the right side of the paper. So I'm starting here with mixtures of cad yellow light and permanent green light number 1. That's the brighter green, and the yellow tone, the very yellow green. And the darker, more neutral green that I'm putting in right now is a mixture of sap green and pyro red. So the sap green along with the pyro red makes for a more neutral, and depending on how you mix it, can be a darker green. As I work this wash across the page, it's important that I keep the edge of the leading edge of this wash very wet, so that it doesn't set a hard edge before I come back in with some more tone and continue the wash. So I'm in essence keeping a small bead of water there, and that allows me to get a nice gradation from one tone to the next. So if I stopped at any point here, such as this, and I were to walk away or let that dry very long and came back with my paint, I'd get a hard edge. I wouldn't get that nice soft edge and that nice gradation in this area right here where I'm working, because I'm working with paper that is fairly saturated, because I'm working with a very moist mixture of paint and a loaded brush. It allows me to come in and charge that wash with various colors, and it just naturally gradates right into one cohesive wash. And while I say the paper is saturated, it's only saturated where I've applied the paint. I have not soaked the paper in any way. I'm working wet on dry. But once I apply this mixture of paint, which has a lot of water in it, the area that I've applied it in becomes saturated. So this is what allows me to get this nice gradation of color and continue this wash across the page as if it's one large shape. And as I've stated before in my videos and in beginning tips, I work on an incline, a 15 to 20 degree incline, which I think people are often afraid of. They feel the paint's going to run. But because I'm working wet on dry, the paint stays put where I put it. But once the paper is wet or saturated, the paint's going to flow in that area. But it will meet resistance when it hits the dry paper. So that's why I keep such a nice clean edge on the bottom of this wash, and I don't have to worry about the paint running, because it will stay in the area where the paper has become wet from applying the paint, and it's not going to run into the areas that I don't want unless I were to put so much water on it and put it at such a steep incline that it'll just overcome the resistance of the paper and run down the page. But I'm not anywhere close to that. I am working at a 15 to 20 degree angle, and my brush is loaded, but I'm not dropping on big, huge drops of water. It's just a moist mixture. So I'm in control here, and I'm working with gravity as I apply this wash. So as I've continued with this wash, I've used mixtures of cad yellow light with permanent green light number 1, sap green with pyrrole red, and there's a few places where you can see a bit of a gold tone. I've used some raw sienna. Here I reached the right side of my composition, and now this has come together as one large shape as I've moved this wash across the page. Here I'm going to paint a tree here. That's a dark value, this tree shape, and it's more of an independent tree. And I wanted to have it in front of the lighter shape, and I wanted a cleaner edge, so I didn't include it as part of the initial wash. This is the mixture of sap green and pyrrole red. And I've put just a touch of burnt sienna in the trunk of that tree. And I blotted that, and it's a little too light, so I'm coming back down with a darker mixture. And now I'm going to work with the cad yellow light and permanent green light with a little bit of sap green mixed in, and just a touch of pyrrole red. I'm going to paint the remainder of this this whole tree line here. So this is an area again on the back side there, where I've got a cleaner edge as it goes against that light shape. You'll notice as this painting develops that my darkest values are actually going to be in the middle ground, and that's going to help build depth into my composition. I'll have dark middle value to dark value in the middle ground, some middle value tones more in the foreground, and my lightest tones in the background. So that helps build depth by separating those values. And you can see here I'm taking my plastic scraper and just giving a slight indication of some tree trunks here in the wash that I just put down. And this is something you have to do when the paper has a bit of a sheen to it, but not so wet that it's glossy. I've dried the wash that I've put down so far, and now I'm going to come in and work on this other area of land, this other land mass here that's kind of a grassy area. So I've got a mixture of cad yellow light, permanent green light, and I'm just putting in a large wash that's going to fill this whole shape. Now here I've taken some raw sienna, and that's where that gold tone is coming from, and now I've got a mixture that's sap green with quite a bit of pyro red in it and a little bit of raw sienna. So I'm going to take this wash all the way to the edge where this mass of land meets with the edge of the water. Here I'm going to finish that wash up. And make sure you pick up any remaining bead of paint there so you don't get a backwash. Next, I'm going to put a light wash of cerulean blue in the water area using a 1/2 inch flat brush. And it's not a continuous wash. I've broken it up, trying to give the suggestion of ripples and reflections in the water. So I move horizontally as I put down this paint mixture, and I'm working from the back forward. Now here I finish up putting down this initial wash of cerulean blue, and now I'm going to come in with a smaller brush and I'm going to touch some of this green mixture that I've been using into this wash of the cerulean blue. So the cerulean blue wash is still wet, so now I'm working wet into wet, and I'm bringing the tone down the page to give the suggestion of the reflection. And as I apply this, and the area I'm in right now is the entire area is pretty much covered with a wash, but as I hit the areas where I have breaks and I have the white of the paper, I'll break up this addition in color that I'm putting in here into the wash. So I'll give it the suggestion here that it's broken up by that reflection, just as the blue tone was. So it gives some breaks in the reflection that's coming down where the white of the paper is showing through. Sometimes when I'll do reflections like this, I'll leave them as is. Other times I'll come back in with a fine mist spray bottle and soften up these reflections some. And that's what I'm going to do with this painting, is I'm going to use my fine mist spray bottle here. So I'm going to soften up these reflections, diffuse some of that color, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back and dry it and then do some more brush work on top of this. The one thing that you need to be aware of when you're using a spray bottle like this it does put out quite a bit of water, and you need to be aware of where that excess water is at and pick it up. You can either use a tissue or a brush, because if you let it sit there, it's going to cause some unwanted or unplanned for backwashes or blossoms. The paper is completely dry now, and I'm going to come in with a 1-inch flat brush that's loaded up with clear water, and I'm putting down a wash that's a broken up wash. It's making horizontal brush marks with the brush strokes. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in with a darker tone and add it to these areas of the water to again strengthen the reflections that are happening in my composition. Now that I have the clear water down, I'm coming in with a smaller brush that has some of this tone, and you can see that I'm bringing it from the top down, and I pick up my brush and just put it in the area where I put the clear water. So this helps, gives a suggestion there of the ripples and the breaks that happen of the reflection in the water. I want to get some darker values in here, so I've added a little bit to the mixture that I'm using to make it darker. It's the sap green with pyro red, and it has just a very little amount of royal blue to give it make it a darker value. At this point, I'm going to come in with some even darker values. These will be my darkest values yet. And this is a mixture of the sap green and pyro red, but I've added much more royal blue to the mixture to give it a very dark value. And I'm placing these dark values in the middle ground. So I'm going to have my darkest darks in the middle ground, some middle value in the foreground, middle to light middle value, and then lightest values are in the background. So I'm isolating the dominance of these values in the foreground, middle ground, and background to help give the suggestion of space and distance. And I'll use this darker value to further define some of the individual shapes of the large initial wash that I put down as one large shape. It's still tied together as a big shape, but it starts to pick up just a little bit of detail brushwork on some individual tree shapes. And you can see sometimes I'll just hit my hand on a wash that I've put down, that it helps give some variation and some texture to the area of the wash that I just put down. So I might touch it with a tissue or just put my finger on it or hit the side of my hand into it just to create some interesting texture and variation. Here I'm going to pick up some of that darker value in the reflection of the water. So I'm just touching some of that on the shoreline, and now I'm going to separate the reflection with just a very small light break between the shore and the reflection itself. You can see just a little bit of a light line that goes through there. And now I'm also going to take some of that same value and use it to make some horizontal brush marks that further suggest some of the ripples in the water. I'm going to be a little bolder with some of these brush marks. I want to have some larger areas of this darker value. So I'm just carrying it back a little bit. I'm going to have I think a larger area back here of this dark value. And I want to bring a bit more of that forward. I want to have a little bit more of that in this middle to foreground area. So I'm going to bring that forward and bring it up here. I'm going to take some of that same darker value mixture and just put some small touches of value along the shoreline here. Not a lot, just enough to help further define the separation in the shadowed area of the shoreline as it meets the water and a little bit of the reflection. But the majority of this dark value is very much in the middle ground. I want to have a bit more definition on that distant mountain range. So I'm taking my violet tone here, which is ultramarine blue with a little quinacridone coral in it, and I'm just touching on the edge of that and then softening it as I go down. But it gives more definition to that distant line of mountains. And I'm going to take some ultramarine blue, still a little coral, quinacridone coral in it, but mostly ultramarine blue, and darken a little bit on the lower area there like the valley. And I'm going to carry that all the way across just to give a little bit more definition to that distant mountain line. You can see though it's a very cool color. I'm going to take my dark value mixture using this quill brush that I use for detail work, and I just want to sharpen up a few areas a little bit more using this value. So put a little darker value in some areas and some firm up some edges, make some of the edges a little soft, a little harder, and just deepen the value. So a few touches here in the water, some horizontal marks, and along that back shoreline. And then I want to take just a few touches here and there, just sharpen things up a little. And I'm going to take a little bit of up here in this back tree line in the field, just to strengthen that horizontal a little bit. Not a lot. So just a few touches. I'm going to put a white mat on this so you can get a good look at it. This is something I'll do a number of times throughout the painting process just so I can get a good look. And that's my painting, Crooked River. I hope you enjoyed this. Be sure to check out Rick Stewart's Watercolor Friends and Subscribers on Facebook. And if you have questions about my materials, you can always go to the studio page of my website, rsurwitzart.com. And if you have questions, you can always email me at contact@rsurwitzart@gmail.com. Thanks for watching.